I'm Dr. Erica Bove, and welcome to the Love and Science podcast. I'm your host, and also the founder of Love and Science, Thriving Through Infertility. I'm so excited you're here today. With over a decade of experience helping thousands of women just like you, I empower professional women to build their families with confidence and compassion. Let's dive in. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to the Love and Science podcast. This is an episode for the new year, and I will be very honest, I have a really hard time with all of the messaging everywhere. New year, new you, transformation challenge. Like everywhere I look, it seems like society is telling me that there's something wrong with me now and that 2026 is going to be my year, right? I believe in that idea at its core. I think maybe my timelines are a little different than other people's. Many of you know this about me, that I'm putting myself in communities all the time where I look at my values, my priorities, I analyze all the different areas of my life and really set my intentions and like think about what do I need to do more of, what do I need to do less of, and putting myself in communities of people who are being bold about their lives. So I will say the concept of this like new year, I do it quarterly. I think why not just do it once a year? But I think there is something to be said for reflecting on the previous year, and also putting forward true intentions for 2026, because when we think about who we are, when we think about what our intentions are for the next year, when we specifically write them down. So please, if you are driving, listening to this, please do grab a journal and a pen, or maybe it's your computer, but I like pen and paper better, and take some time to write things down, because there is a magic in writing something down. Like I said, I do this quarterly, and it is crazy to me. Things I've even forgotten that I've written down, they're somewhere in my subconscious, apparently. I'm like, oh, I'm doing this. I forgot. I totally said this. Or, oh, this is the goal I set that I totally forgot. It's wild when we put our goals or intentions down on paper. It's wild what happens. But that having been said, I really thought hard about what I wanted to offer you today, because I really want us to enter 2026 with the energy and the time and the resources to help us get exactly what we need. And so as I think about things, I have some questions for reflection. And if you're like me, you might like listen to this more than once and use these as journal prompts. But these are some of the things I think are most valuable as we integrate 2025 and prepare for 2026. All right, so here's some questions for reflection. What quiet battles have I been fighting? This is a really important one, because I fight battles. I don't always tell people about them, maybe my most inner circle or my journal. But I think that when we can acknowledge those things and maybe make an intention that those battles will be less energy intensive, or that there might be some sort of a clearing or progress, I think that's when we see those things. So what quiet battles have I been fighting, whether it's the fertility journey or otherwise? What limiting beliefs no longer serve me? We all have them, right? And maybe there's some different ones than last year, but oftentimes we carry them forward from year to year because they're often rooted in our childhoods, right? So what limiting beliefs no longer serve me? Where am I now on the fertility journey compared to last year at this time? We can think about, like, maybe you have a better fit for you in an REI, like a doctor who understands you and is really the person you believe is going to help you with this next phase and really understands your details. Maybe you have more embryos frozen now than you did last year, even if your treatments haven't worked yet. Maybe you have a new diagnosis. Maybe people understand that you have adenomyosis or endometriosis, or maybe you had chronic endometritis that was diagnosed and treated. And so, what new awareness does your REI and you have about your body now? And objectively speaking, again, keeping the stories out of it, but like objectively speaking, if you were to look at your medical chart, like where are you today compared to last year at this point? Another question is, what new relationships do I have now that I didn't have last year? Maybe it's you've engaged in a supportive Facebook group of people and feel, that you're not so alone. Maybe you have an old friend from childhood who's also undergoing fertility treatments and you guys have reconnected. Maybe you're part of the love and science community and didn't know this level of support was possible, and you feel so much better about things and more calm and more steady because you have a community now of people who really get it. um, maybe it's that your clinic is different, or that you have like a different perspective on your care, like with your, physician team or nursing team. Maybe you have a new therapist who is, in your corner and is able to really help you understand some of those limiting beliefs and work beyond them. So, so many of us, I mean, we can't go through a year without having relationships that we've nurtured, maybe some that we've let go of, but just really thinking, okay, who is in my inner circle? Who are my ride and die people? And what new relationships have happened this year? And maybe what new relationships do I have now that I really want to nurture in 2026? I think that's a really interesting question. People are gifts in our lives. My dad always says, the best gifts in life can't be opened, and I think he's right about that. I think our relationships are truly our greatest gift, and how can we nurture the people in our lives who really support us and nurture us and love us, help us become the best versions of ourselves? How can we reorient our brain in a way that helps our fertility journey? So I've been thinking a lot about this. I think that oftentimes we get mired in like the treatments that didn't work or the transfers that didn't work, or, I just, maybe a story, I just am somebody and like bad things happen to me, or I have all the bad luck. And so sometimes I think when we tell ourselves those stories, it's human nature, right? Because our brains are trying to protect us, but we might blow through the fact that we had a couple of IVF cycles where we generated a lot of embryos, or oh my goodness, maybe there is a cycle where my lining looked really good and now we know what protocol I'm going to use moving forward. Or maybe I got new insurance that's going to cover fertility treatments that I didn't know, and that like now the financial burden is less. Or, maybe there's a new treatment that didn't exist last year because of the advances in the research, and somebody with my particular diagnosis is going to have a better chance at this working. And so I think, time keeps passing, but we have such a negativity bias. It's how our brains are wired. And we really need to think about what we're oriented to now in terms of the stories we're telling ourselves about our fertility journeys, and how can we like extrapolate out and then reorient ourselves to what is true, right? That authentic hope, which I always talk about, which is hope grounded in science. I am really good at helping people with this, that reorientation. It's really hard to do ourselves sometimes, because sometimes it's like the hand on our face, like it's so close to us, we don't even recognize that we have a hand on our face. But when we can get a little space from it, when we can, sort of see it with a little perspective, we can then sort of start to have that cognitive diffusion, if you will, so that we can start to see it for what it is and gently probe it and challenge it and move on forward. So this reorientation is something that I think is so important. Another question for reflection is, what have I grieved? Maybe it's the loss of a pregnancy. That's something that is really, really important to grieve. Maybe it's an embryo didn't survive the thaw, and there was a lot of hope on that embryo. And, that's something that clearly deserves some time to process, and just some things we don't understand why that happened, but maybe that's certainly a loss. Maybe we've lost a loved one this last year, and that's incredibly painful to think about, especially the holidays bring that up a lot, because we're like, oh, this person was here last year at this time, or maybe a few years ago, and that can be very painful. So I think thinking about what we've grieved is really important as we navigate this process moving forward. Another question is, what have I gained? Like it's not always all lost, right? The universe has its cycles, and maybe we've gained a coach, right? Maybe we've gained the support of REI. Maybe we've gained some sort of a grant. I just had a patient who got a grant. That's amazing. Maybe I've gained free meds from a source that maybe a friend, is done, and she gave me hers, and that's a gift too. And so just really kind of telling, what do I have? What have I gained? Maybe it's, I learned how to use my voice where I didn't know how to do that last year. Maybe I've grown closer with my partner as a result of this process. And so really just taking stock of like, what have I gained in the last year, objectively speaking, both sort of tangible and intangible. I think it's really important to do. Another question is, where are things still uncertain, whether it's results. Maybe you're like waiting on embryo data, especially with all the holiday closures, or maybe you're uncertain about your action plan, your next steps. Like, are you going to do more IUI? Are you going to try IVF? If you're doing IVF and it's not working, do you think about an egg donor? Do you think about additional care depending on your situation? Maybe it's crappy sperm and a sperm donor. Like there's so many different sort of questions as this process unfolds. And so I think that, especially if you're a high achieving woman listening to this podcast, and maybe even a female physician, because most of my people are female physicians, like we like action plans, right? It's like subjective assessment, and plan. And like that assessment plan, we're like, okay, boom, 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 what is it? But when it's our own journey and there's so much gray and data free zones, like sometimes our heads can just spin with what to do next. And so I think it really does take a coordinated team. I believe, your REI, and I love to help people with this as well as help them make their most values based decisions, empowered choices, so that you can have confidence in your treatment plan and that you're not like sort of going down the PubMed rabbit hole to be like, well, is there anything out there that we haven't missed? I like to outsource that in my own life, right? So that other people can help me with those things when I'm the patient. And that's the burden I love to help, take from people, is that sort of ambivalence or that sort of lack of clarity, because clarity is yours, agency is yours. We just got to help you find it. What if what you're uncertain about is belief in yourself, right? Maybe your story is that you've only gotten bad news and bad news is going to continue. And like, I'm going through the motions, but I don't really fully believe that this process is going to work. That's a low vibration frequency and that can be changed, right? So maybe that's the uncertainty, is whether this is going to work ever. And also like trusting the plan. I think that goes hand in hand with having confidence in the plan. If you're uncertain about, leaning in and trusting, and there's still a huge part of you that's still very self-protective, that also is not good for the process. And so how can we allow for some safe vulnerability to crack open the door for possibility, right? To trust the process, to trust your REI when appropriate, to trust me, to trust your body, because our bodies, they have a lot of wisdom. And if our hypervigilant brain, our doctor brain, if you're a doctor, is on overdrive, I really do believe that that hinders the process. And so learning that fine balance of balancing trust and advocacy is really important to do. Another question, especially as a coach, I love this question, is where am I stuck? Maybe it's a decision to make. Maybe it's fighting with the insurance. Maybe it's stuck in your relationship with your partner. Maybe you're on different pages. Maybe you feel stuck in terms of like not knowing what to do next, right? I think that question, where am I stuck, is really helpful because we all get stuck at different points in time, but sometimes we don't know how to get unstuck. And, there are ways to get unstuck. I think we have to look at our thoughts, we have to look at our feelings, we have to look at our circumstances and understand that even with the same circumstance, we can choose a different path. And what's that path going to be? And how can we, take back our agency and get unstuck? So that's really important. Where am I stuck? What intentions do I have for the coming year? Now, I will say I used to say goals until I met Dr. Jessie Mahoney, and she really helped me to reframe. Like goals are so like achievement oriented, right? And I think intentions are a lot gentler. It's a similar concept, but like there's not so much self-judgment if that very thing doesn't happen, especially not on the timeline that we had like said it had to happen in. And that's the thing I will say about the fertility journey is we have to release the timeline, as hard as that is. It's like, well, I'm finishing my residency now and I'm moving across the country for my fellowship, or I'm, in between jobs, like whatever it is, like the universe just does not respond to that. I don't understand why, but it's like us trying to control the timeline is not helpful for the process. And so if I can have an intention and I can release that timeline, that is incredibly powerful. So, maybe your intention is, how do I show up? Not just like at the fertility clinic, but how do I show up for my patients? How do I show up in my relationship with my partner? How do I show up, in my relationship with myself? Like, what energy do I want to embody most of the days every day? One of my good friends, Chrissy Ott, she's a physician coach in Oregon, and she sort of asked me the question, like, when you think of yourself in 2025, like what predominant, like how do you think of yourself? Like how do you, like what energy did you bring with you most of the time to most of the days? And that was like a really insightful question, because I think that, again, in a judgment-free zone, if we to like look at our lives as we look at like a movie screen, and just be like, huh, interesting. Like, personally, I would say in 2025, I showed up very motivated, right? Like I'm motivated to grow love and science. I'm motivated to take on the new role as program director of the fellowship. I'm motivated to keep taking the highest, quality care of my patients and my clients. And so I've had a very motivated energy in 2025, but I also have had a very full schedule. And so as I look at 2026, I'm looking at what's truly sustainable. I do think that I will be able to stay motivated because I have plans and dreams and desires and visions, especially for love and science. But there's also that question of like, do I want things to always be so full? My calendar, my energy, like all of those things. What do I need to take away to be able to show up in 2026 a little bit less rushed, a little bit less overbooked, a little bit less hurried, so that I can be an even better version of myself for my people and myself, right? So that's an example of like how that question made me reflect. Oh yeah, like when I think about all the ways I spent my time, I'm really proud of how I spent my time. And, not very non-judgmentally, like I know that for me to keep serving and to keep growing, I know what I have to do. And that's going to be me, in some uncomfortable conversations about what that looks like. Okay. Another intention you might have is like, what kind of support do I need to enlist to let these intentions come to fruition? And so maybe it's, a new REI, like maybe again, I don't think that's always the answer, just like therapy, right? Sometimes it's not the therapist, it's we got to look at the relationship. But I do think that there are some mismatches out there. And I feel it too. Sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, I don't think this patient's a good match for me. And maybe they would be better served by somebody else. And so I think, if you're thinking about a second opinion or you're thinking about like enlisting a coach or a therapist, like we all need support. Sometimes we think we don't, especially being female physicians. If you are that listening to this, or even just very high achieving, it's hard to admit that we need support, but we do. We need our village, we need our team, we need guides to help with this process. We need people like colleagues who are undergoing similar things for support. So really thinking about what support will I need to enlist to make 2026 the best year yet in terms of this journey. What relationships will I nurture? I mean, I touched on that before, like people are gifts. And so, people, if there are people in our lives to be our angels, our spiritual guides. I mean, I believe that. Like I believe that the people who are closest to me are my spiritual guides. Like they're my angels. Like they're here because we're on a spiritual journey together and our souls are evolving. And I see those people as like very, very sacred to me. And so when you have somebody who's plopped in your life like a gift from the universe, right? Who is a gift from the universe, how do you show up in that relationship? How do you prioritize that relationship so that the highest good, the highest evolution, the highest connection, the highest love from that relationship can be realized? And maybe it's that you put on your calendar that every week, every Friday or Saturday, you touch base with your inner circle. That works for me, right? Like I don't go a week without touching base with my favorite people. Again, that's an intention. I probably am about maybe once a month right now. And so like room for growth. But I think that like if we can identify those people who bring us joy, who bring us support, who bring us evolution, who bring us love, we want more of those things. We can be very intentional about the energy that we bring to those spaces, and also about the timelines. My brother just moved to Peru. I said to him, I'm not going to go 2 months without talking to you. Okay. So we're going to say, if we haven't talked and it's been 2 months, we're going to hop on a call and we're going to, make it happen. So I just think sometimes like being very structured like that can be very helpful. Okay, very important. What relationships will I pause or sever even if they don't serve us? So I know somebody right now and her mother is very unsupportive of the process. And not that I would ever say that one should sever a relationship with her mother, at least not with a lot of without a lot of therapy and thought and conversations and effort, right? But I really think this person's mother is very, very harmful and toxic to the process, and it's almost worse than the process itself. And so, if that was somebody in my life, mother aside, I think I would have a conversation with them and say, like, this is really what I need. And like, if you can't provide this safe space, this non-judgment, then I think we need to take a pause because this is really important to me. And if you can't see that, then, I have to figure that out. I have to have my safe spaces. And so maybe it's a mother-in-law. I know, gosh, I do a lot of coaching on mother-in-laws. Like maybe it's somebody who really does not understand or says insensitive things. And so really do an inventory of your relationships and like, who are the people, the energy vampires, as Judith Orloff would say, who drain your energy and give you like a hangover after you're done spending time with them. And if a person has that effect on you, either significantly limit the time you spend with them or just take a pause. And I mean, I usually don't do that without like addressing the situation. Like if it's somebody that I care about, like I don't really think that we should just toss relationships out the window. But I do think that if we've done our due diligence and had that conversation, especially if it's somebody who, you know, ideally we would have a relationship with and they can't be supportive of us during that time. Like I said, we need all of our vectors in one direction. And you know, you got to do what's right for you, especially during this vulnerable time. So really think about that one. That's really important. So then, as we think about those intentions, right, I just gave a long list of like, how will I show up? What support do I need? What relationships will I nurture? What relationships will I let go of? What do I need to make these things a reality, right? That's sort of in my coaching communities that I'm a part of. We're always thinking about, okay, this is the goal, this is the intention, this is where I want to head. So then how do we then build that roadmap to get there? Okay, so maybe it's time. Like I know a lot of physicians, you know, maybe ER doctors or otherwise who go per diem or part time to be able to have a schedule that better allows for the appointments, the processing, the mind body connection, all those things. You know, I think it gets tricky because the way our health insurance is, at least in the US, is that oftentimes it's connected to our jobs. And, you know, if your health insurance that's paying for IVF, if you're so lucky, is coming from your job, then that can be a tricky situation. And so I've had people like drop to like the least amount of effort possible to get the health insurance, or maybe get creative and get insurance from a different way, or even pay out of pocket. You know, I think there is a cost to freedom sometimes. And I, you know, everyone, I can't speak to what's right for everybody, but I think we all really need to like make a very thoughtful choice when it comes to these things. So time, you know, time is like the most important resource. We don't think about it enough because we're so used to being in medical school and residency, maybe fellowship, working 80 to 100 hours a week and not having our lives be our own. But especially if you're listening to this and, you know, maybe you're an attending, maybe you can have a little more autonomy. I've had a couple of coaching clients recently who are like, you know, I'm just not going to take call during this period. I'm going to make it up later. I will, you know, I'll do what's mine to do. But you know, this is a time when I'm undergoing fertility treatments, or maybe they don't even give a reason why, but say like, I'm not taking call this month or this weekend or whatever it is. And I think that's very powerful. I think we need to um, really ask for what we need. I say, if it was an appendicitis, you'd be out for 2 weeks. And so why is this any different? So I know that's controversial, but I think that we have to carve out the time and the space for this process. Otherwise, it's just crammed in and it feels awful. And at some point, you know, our bodies just break down. So think about the time that you need to make this a reality. And maybe it's like time, like I'm, you know, just about to launch my course and I say, really an hour, you know, an hour a week is really, you know, necessary as the bare minimum, but ideally like carving out 10 minutes a day, right? To like think about the concepts to make it applicable to your own life. Like they say, where our attention goes, the energy flows. And so if we're trying to cultivate more growth, more awareness, more presence, more mind body connection, we have to vote with our time. And this is not to say like, you know, you need one more thing to do on your long list of things. This is also to say, what can you take off the list so that the way that you spend your time is aligned with your highest values and your intentions and your priorities, because all those things matter, right? So again, time, you know, that's the most important thing. And so sometimes it takes some thinking outside the box, but it's a really important element. Um, okay, so what do I need to make this a reality? Time and people, right? So maybe it's, like I said before, maybe you're not at the right clinic for you just yet, and you need to seek another opinion and find a better fit for you. Maybe it's, you know, that you've been thinking about getting a coach like me or another fertility coach, and that really now is the time where you're like, okay, treatments haven't worked thus far, and I have to try something different because I don't want to be at the same place, you know, in a year and, you know, still be without a pregnancy, still be without, you know, my journey moving forward. And so I think that as we think about, you know, what people do we need, I personally think that every fertility patient needs a coach. I think that there's too much to be handled in the context of typical Western medicine. And I think a lot of the successes that I'm seeing, you know, over half of my clients are on their way to having a baby, either pregnant or delivered by now, actually. And I believe I have full faith that the other ones are coming too. It just, you know, it hasn't connected as of yet, but I have full faith that it's going to happen for them. And so in that sense, like, you know, what that's buying back time too is like, you know, figuring out that mind-body connection, figuring out the ideal protocol and steps forward so that this does not take any more time than it does, right? So I would say the worst thing would be to be in the same exact place a year from now. And I think about in my own life what I need to do to make those changes. And so just like that, I would say, what do you need to do to make sure that you're not in the same spot in a year? And I think a large part of that for many people is enlisting a skilled coach who can help them, really, like I say, with confidence and clarity and community and compassion, bridge themselves and be bridged in the safe, loving community as well to parenthood, which is a real gift. Okay, what else do I need to make these intentions a reality? We talked about time, we talked about people, which also could include therapists. I didn't say that in the sort of the people category, but energy, right? That's sort of along with time. So many of us feel like zombies at the end of our clinical days, right? And one thing one of my coaches, Dr. Una, says is like, what do you need to do more of to make something happen? What do you need to do less of? And so with every single intention that I set, right, I always say, okay, well, what do I need to take on? Really good at taking things on. So many of us are, but what do I need to let go of? And that's sometimes even harder, right? Because we don't like letting go of things. We don't like disappointing other people, but what do I need to do less of or let go of to make this a reality? Maybe part of it is, a relationship that doesn't serve. Maybe part of it is, thinking about like letting go of a clinic that really doesn't seem to be the best fit. Maybe it's letting go. I mean, if we look at our lives and we're not in the best relationships, sometimes even though as very complicated that is, maybe we have to be really honest and say like, maybe I'm ambivalent about this process because my relationship needs some work and maybe that needs to be the priority for, the next foreseeable future so I can figure that out and then I'll revisit this fertility piece. So again, everyone's situation has so many different layers and complexities, but I think one thing I found is universal for people is to say, if I'm going to set these intentions, and hopefully by now you've named a few, what do I need in terms of time, people, and energy to make that happen, both in terms of what do I take on, like what new resources do I, do I get, and also what do I need to let go of, what's not serving me so that I can create room for what's to come. Okay. So, the last sort of question I will ask, well, I always have more questions, but the last structured question I'll ask is how can I make January 1st, 2027 different than January 1st, 2026? So we all are right now at January 1st, 2026, right? Again, filtering out all the media, new year, new you, all that stuff, but like really authentically, like, where am I today with grace and self-compassion and non-judgment, looking at the beautiful things that have happened in 2025, looking at the areas of growth, looking at the pain points, and then saying like, okay, if I stay in these same patterns that I've been in and I don't change anything, what is the likelihood that in a year, when I'm a year older, that I'm going to be in the same spot, right? And so that's really the question is, what do I need to do to make 2027 different? Looking at your intentions, looking at your time, people, and your energy, and figuring out a different way. And also, how can I put myself in the presence of people who are not letting infertility have the last word? Whether that's a Facebook group, there's a couple beautiful Facebook groups out there that I've seen. Again, be careful on the Facebook group front because I've seen some bad ones too. But maybe it's a support group like the one that we have at Love and Science, where the norm is doing these things that are just not done in other spaces. Or maybe it's a local support group, or I've seen so many beautiful communities where people are able to make these transformations. And so thinking about maybe the new relationships that you might forge that you didn't even expect because of this journey that are going to be the people who bridge you through. And so I'm done talking. I'm going to say, like I always enter support groups, what is your next right thing? Okay, so what does that mean? The next right thing is when we look at the direction that we're hoping to go, we don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but we know that that's where we want to go. We think about, okay, what is the next step, the next action, the next thing I'm going to do that is going to move me in the direction of that goal? Because this is the thing. Once we take the first step, we take that step, or we have a new perspective. Then the next step becomes more clear, right? So we might not know what's like 5 or 10 or 20 steps ahead, but if we know the direction we're trying to head and we have a vague idea of like, okay, well, what's the next thing? Maybe it's I need to call and get that second opinion. Maybe it's I need to book a consult call with Coach Erica to see, if she can provide a perspective on my situation and what the community is like. Maybe it's, I need to have a conversation with my mother or mother-in-law and really start to say how this is affecting me and set some boundaries because I need to protect myself from this process. Like there's so many different ways that this can take shape. Maybe it's, I need to get a personal trainer, reactivate my gym membership because I know that my lifestyle, of not exercising has really affected my mental and physical health. And I'm, again, being very careful not to just be very trendy of the new year, new you, but like maybe that is your next right thing to focus on your physical health, so that your mental health will also follow. And maybe that's your next right thing. So I don't know exactly what your next right step is, but I think when you really take these questions seriously, when you really get out pen and paper and do some introspection, the clarity usually comes, right? And so when you have that answer, okay, like what is my next right thing to do? Maybe it's that your husband, his sperm seem on the borderline and he hasn't gotten a urology evaluation yet. Maybe that's the next right thing, is to try to sort that out. There's so many different situations and so many different possibilities. But I think, once you do that, and then you'll get more clarity about what to do after that. And that's how we start to build that bridge in the direction of our dreams in a way that's actually attainable. So that is my wisdom today. I am full of intentions for the new year, not empty intentions, but intentions that are grounded in full belief, full faith, full passion that each of us deserves to have the families that we desire. And I think that if the desire is in your heart to be a parent, then that is what you deserve. And I'm here to help. So it is one of my life's greatest honors to have this podcast and share this wisdom that I have been so grateful to have because of my own life experiences and from all the guides who have helped me. And so I hope at least one thing inspired you today in a way that it's going to get your 2026 started in a way that's authentic and aligned. So you know how much I love you. And until the next time, bye.